A barefoot child, silent and ragged, did not ask for a single coin. He simply knelt down and gently touched the motionless legs of a little girl in a wheelchair. No one understood why, and no one could have guessed just a few hours later, the girl, who had not spoken a word for half a year, suddenly found her voice, and the first words she spoke were to defend that boy. Everything began on a morning that seemed completely ordinary, but turned out to be the morning that changed the lives of 3 people forever. There is a certain kind of quiet that only exists in a park early in the morning. It is not because the place is empty, but because most people who are there are trying to heal something inside themselves. Among them that day was a father pushing his young daughter in a wheelchair. 7-year-old Ellie sat still silent, avoiding all eye contact. Her face was cold and her eyes were empty. It had been 6 months since the accident that took her mother's life and left her legs paralyzed. Since then, Ellie had completely withdrawn from the world. Her father, Millionaire Anderson, had tried everything: physical therapy, psychological counseling, medication, and top-tier specialists. But Ellie remained locked inside herself like a fortress. Taking her on walks every weekend morning was just another part of the recovery program, though in reality, he had already lost hope. That morning, like always, he bought Ellie a cup of hot cocoa. She did not drink it. She did not reject it either. She simply remained silent, just like every other day. Across the pathway, a boy appeared. He was skinny, dressed in wrinkled, worn-out clothes, his hair messy, and his bare feet covered in dirt. But he was not like the usual homeless children people often saw. He did not beg, did not approach couples or people at picnic tables. He simply stood there for a very long time, quietly watching Ellie. As Mr. Anderson and Ellie passed by, the boy suddenly stepped closer, without a word, without a hint of emotion. Mr. Anderson immediately stood up, alert and ready. But the boy did not look at him. He walked up to the wheelchair, gently knelt down, and placed his hand on Ellie's motionless legs. It was not an aggressive move nor something strange. It was just a light touch, enough to feel real skin, enough for Ellie to feel seen. Startled, Mr. Anderson instinctively pulled the boy away. "Get away from her," he shouted. The boy did not resist. He just looked at Ellie one last time, with eyes calm and still like an early morning lake, then stood up and walked away. No one knew who he was, where he came from, or what he was trying to do. The whole encounter lasted less than a minute, but for Mr. Anderson, it felt like a direct collision with the emotional space he had tried so hard to avoid. He was angry, caught off guard, and afraid. Afraid that the boy might have hurt Ellie or more simply because it was a situation he could not control, something he was used to doing in both work and life. In his eyes, that boy was just a strange, wandering child, an unpredictable variable in a world he had meticulously calculated. After driving the boy away, he checked on Ellie, asking if she was all right. She did not respond. Her face stayed exactly the same. No emotion, no fear, no clear expression. It seemed like nothing had happened at all. But what he did not know was that inside her, something tiny had begun to shift, like a faint ray of light slipping through the crack of a long-locked door. That evening, when Mr. Anderson helped Ellie into bed, tucked her in, and turned off the lights, he gave no further thought to what had happened that morning. It seemed to close out just like every other unexpected episode in previous therapies. But as he turned to leave the room, a small voice spoke behind him. He understood me. He froze in place. Ellie had not spoken for 6 months. He turned around, thinking he had misheard. But Ellie had lifted her head. "The boy this morning," she said clearly, slowly. He rushed forward. "You know him." Why would you say that? Ellie did not answer right away. She looked down at her legs, then whispered softly, "Because he touched them, and he was not afraid." Just one sentence, But for Mr. Anderson, it was more than all the doctor's machines or empty words of encouragement had ever achieved. For the first time, Ellie spoke about someone else, and more importantly, for the first time she felt connected. Mr. Anderson did not understand everything that was happening, but there was one thing he knew for sure: Ellie had just done something no one ever expected. A child who had stayed silent for half a year had just spoken. And not because of a doctor or because of her father, but because of the silent touch of a stranger. This story is not over. In fact, it is only just beginning. That father did not believe in miracles, but he began to wonder what had truly happened in that brief moment. Who was that boy? Why did he come to Ellie? And how could such a simple gesture awaken a girl who had seemed completely disconnected from the world? Beneath a quiet overpass tucked between two bustling neighborhoods was a cold, shadowy space where sunlight almost never reached. Right there along the moss-covered wall stood a makeshift shelter built from plastic tarps and rotting wooden planks. It was just big enough for a child to lie down in. The place had no official name, but people around there called it Leo's Corner because there was a boy who lived there. No one knew Leo's full name or where he came from, or even how old he was. All they knew was that he had been around the area for over a year, appearing so quietly it felt as if he had been there even before the overpass was built. Leo was so thin that most people assumed he was severely malnourished. His skin was darkened by the sun, his hair stuck together in clumps, and his arms and legs were covered in old scratches and mosquito bites. The clothes on his back were often the only layer between him and the chill of the night air, torn at the shoulders, frayed at the knees with a collar that drooped almost to his chest. He went barefoot, but never complained of the cold. And oddly enough, he never said he was hungry either. Unlike other homeless children who wandered through markets begging for food, Leo never asked for money, never tugged at anyone's sleeve, never held out his hand. He just literally sat still for hours on stone steps near the park, outside hospitals, or by the entrance of a subway station. What caught people's attention, or at least the few who actually noticed him, was Leo's gaze. It was not the innocent stare of a child, nor the hardened look of someone who had lived too long on the streets. It was a gaze that had known loss. He did not look at passers-by with expectation. He simply watched for a long time the ones who walked with a limp, the elderly leaning on canes, or the silent figures in wheelchairs. Leo did not look at them with pity. He was not curious. He simply followed them with his eyes, as if something between them and him needed no words to be understood. People had seen him sit for hours next to a man paralyzed from the waist down, sunbathing in a hospital corridor. Leo never said a word. He did not do anything. He just sat there. And when the man's family came to wheel him away, Leo gave a small nod and quietly slipped into a hidden corner. Another time, a security guard had chased him off a park bench. But 2 hours later, the same guard saw him crouching with a rag, gently wiping the dirt from the wheel of an old woman's chair, someone who had no one with her. Leo did not need a reason to be near someone. He did not need payment. He did not need thanks. For him, simply being allowed to sit beside someone without being driven away or treated like garbage was already a kind of miracle. But not everyone could understand that. To most people, Leo was just a filthy kid who looked like he had stepped straight out of a charity commercial people skipped after 3 seconds and then forgot. But for the storyteller, it was precisely that quiet way of sitting, asking for nothing, demanding nothing, that was most unforgettable. Because very few people in this world, even adults, can sit beside someone else without making them feel judged, pitied, or weaker. Leo could do that at 9 years old, but he did not come by that stillness naturally. It came from a long, old, and silent memory, a place where everyone who had passed through Leo's life had disappeared, except for one, his mother. In the past, Leo had lived with his mother in a tiny, cramped rental room at the end of a low-income housing row in an old workers' neighborhood. They did not have much: a rickety single bed, a few clothes hanging on a string, and a flickering mini gas stove. But to young Leo, that was a complete world. His mother worked in a garment factory. She was not the type of mom who read bedtime stories, but she taught Leo how to listen, not through words, but through her silence. A work accident happened when Leo had just turned 5. A steel frame fell and crushed her back during a night shift. The result was permanent spinal damage. The doctor said she would never walk again. From that day on, Rosa, Leo's mother, stayed in bed. Leo became her only caregiver. No one trained him, no one showed him how. He learned to lift her by trial and error. Learned to make porridge through burnt pots. Learned to clean her, change her, and keep her hands warm, because he feared the day he would touch her and feel nothing. Every night Leo sat beside his mother. He did not talk about school like other kids because he had never gone to school. Instead, he told her about what he saw out the window: 2 cats fighting on the metal roof, a bread seller who dropped his money, an old man who walked very slowly but always smiled. His mother did not speak much, she just listened. But one thing she always did, no matter how tired she was to rest her hand on the back of Leo's hand and place it on her leg. And so it became a ritual. Every night Leo would sit beside the bed, his hand resting on her leg. He did nothing, just held it there. He did not know why, but each time he did, his mother seemed to breathe more steadily and fall asleep more easily. Leo did not know what emotional connection meant, had never heard of tactile therapy. But he understood one thing: sometimes a touch does not need to fix anything. It just needs to come at the right time, and that is enough. That winter came early. Wind screamed through the metal doorframe and pierced their worn-out blankets. Leo woke up in the night to the sound of his mother's strained breathing. He rushed to boil water, warmed his hands, tucked her in again. But the next morning, she did not wake up. There was no family, no funeral. Leo used an old washcloth to wipe her forehead. He pulled the blanket up gently. Then he sat down just like every other night before, placed his hand on her legs, sat still, said nothing. The sun rose high before someone discovered the room empty, except for a child sitting next to someone who had grown cold. After that day, Leo had no home, but he carried the only thing life had left him: a memory of presence. Silent, wordless, but real. And that is why he began sitting beside people with disabilities, not because he thought he mattered, but because he knew sometimes people just need someone brave enough to stay with their pain and not run away. He continued like that, moving quietly past park benches, hospital corridors, street corners, sitting next to someone he believed might be lonely. But not everyone saw what he carried. The city was not a place without kindness, but it was not a place that easily welcomed those who belonged nowhere. Leo was one of those children with no identification, no school, no sponsor, and most importantly, no trust. In the eyes of adults, a dirty child wandering the streets was bound to become a thief. It did not matter how clear his eyes were or how polite his voice sounded. All it took was being in the wrong place, and Leo would be scolded, chased away, or worse. Once he stood outside the glass wall of a hospital waiting room, watching an old woman in a wheelchair trembling as she tried to reach for a glass of water. Leo walked in, carefully picked up the cup, and brought it gently within her reach. Before he could pull his hand back, a man, probably her son, rushed over. "What are you doing?" he shouted. Leo panicked, tried to explain, but the next words came fast: "Trying to steal. You sneaked in here to pick pockets, didn't you?" Then the man shoved Leo hard enough to knock him flat onto the cold floor. The water spilled everywhere. A security guard rushed over, asked no questions, and simply gestured for Leo to leave. Leo did not cry. He got up, bowed, and apologized, even though he had done nothing wrong. As he walked away, someone heard him whisper, "She looked thirsty." The words were lost in the noise of rolling gurneys and intercom calls. The moment ended quickly, just like so many misunderstandings Leo had lived through. One evening, someone saw Leo standing outside a convenience store. He was not begging. He did not stare at the products. He was watching a young woman struggling to carry a baby and a heavy bag of groceries. As she walked out, Leo took a step forward, reached out his hand, not to ask for anything, but to help hold the door. But from far off, the security guard yelled, "Get out of here! No begging allowed!" Leo pulled his hand back, bowed his head, and slowed his steps. The woman said nothing. She just looked at Leo, then at the guard, her face uncertain. What made Leo different was not that he did not react, but that he carried no anger with him. The next morning, it was Leo who picked up the cardboard boxes scattered outside the store and stacked them neatly. Another time, he found a dropped scarf near a bench, dusted it off, and hung it carefully on the armrest, then left before anyone could see. He had never yelled back, never raised his voice or glared. The way Leo withdrew from conflict was not cowardice. It was the wisdom of someone who had tasted enough bitterness to know not everyone can see the truth right away. And for Leo, what mattered was not clearing his name, but preserving his humanity even when others saw him as a stain on society. For many street kids, being rejected again and again might drive them to madness, rebellion, or hatred. But Leo did not fall into any of that. Not because he was weak, but because he understood people push away what they are afraid to understand. And if a 9-year-old child can hold on to kindness through every rejection, then that kindness is not instinct, it is a choice, made every day, even when the world gives nothing back. And that very same unconditional kindness in a fleeting moment at the park left a real imprint in the mind of a girl who seemed beyond the reach of emotion. Since that brief touch, no one had seen the homeless boy again. Mr. Anderson thought it was just a random incident, like countless small collisions that happen in this city every day. He had even forgotten about it, or tried to. But Ellie had not. She did not talk about it. She did not ask. She did not mention it. But she began to draw. In the notebook that once held only scribbled chaotic colors, there was now a new figure. A thin boy with a tattered scarf around his neck, wide dark eyes, sitting next to a wheelchair. When Mr. Anderson flipped through those pages one day, he froze. In the corner of each drawing, Ellie had written a word, sometimes wait, sometimes understand, and sometimes just a quiet ellipsis. She never explained, and he did not ask. It was just that, in the following nights, Ellie began to whisper words, not full conversations, just scattered thoughts in the silence of her room. Things like, he was not afraid, or no need to say anything to understand. At first, Mr. Anderson thought his daughter might be developing an unhealthy obsession. He became worried, brought her notebook to the psychologist. But instead of reacting with concern, the doctor smiled and said, "Drawing is how children speak when they do not have words. Ellie is beginning to talk again, in her own way." Mr. Anderson remained skeptical. He had seen too many strange phases in all the previous therapies, none had led anywhere. But something about this felt different. One night he walked into the room and found Ellie drawing again. She was not slouched over like usual. She was sitting upright, focused. On the page was a boy, leaning down to touch someone's legs. He stepped closer. "Who are you drawing?" Ellie hesitated, then put her pencil down, did not look at him, and replied simply, "He did not ask why I was in a wheelchair." That was her first full sentence in nearly half a year. No one taught her. No one forced her. Ellie just wanted to say it. For some reason or some feeling she could not yet name, Ellie wanted to keep that boy alive in her memory through her drawings. And with each line she traced, she was opening a path, one that could lead her soul back into life. After the father's ban, the house fell into a strange silence. The air inside was colder than any winter. Mr. Anderson no longer mentioned, Leo never asked Ellie anything related to that boy. Whenever he saw his daughter sitting quietly, he would only ask, "Does it hurt?" as if that was the only thing he still knew how to ask. Ellie would nod or shake her head, nothing more. She no longer drew, no longer opened her notebook, no longer whispered those little monologues in the dark. All the tender sprouts that had just begun to emerge were snapped off by a single, cold glance, and then, on a day that seemed perfectly ordinary, everything shattered. That day was Ellie's routine session with a new physical therapist, someone Mr. Anderson had personally requested. This therapist was highly credentialed, strict, and notably had no belief in emotional resonance therapy. During the session, Ellie sat completely still. The therapist asked her to try gently bending her right knee. Ellie did not move. She repeated the request once, twice, a third time. Still nothing. After 10 minutes, the therapist turned to Mr. Anderson. "She's still putting up strong psychological resistance. Until that's opened up, even if her legs are healthy, her brain will stay locked." Mr. Anderson nodded and said, "Sweetheart, listen to me. Just follow along. Forget about those silly things from before. Focus on your main goal." Ellie remained silent. "You know I've done everything for you. Those things you thought understood you. They were just your imagination." And then, as if the final thread finally snapped after being stretched too far, Ellie burst. "It was not imagination," she cried out. Her voice was hoarse, shaking, but clear with every word. "He did not avoid me. He was not afraid when I was trembling. He did not tell me to be strong. He did not make me try to be better. He just sat there." Mr. Anderson was stunned. Ellie cried and choked through her words. "You never knelt like he did." The room fell into a suffocating silence. That sentence hit Mr. Anderson like a blade to the deepest part of him. Not because he had been shouted at, but because for the first time he felt smaller than his own daughter sitting in a wheelchair. She cried, not because of pain, but because of everything that had been buried. Because she had waited far too long to be heard, but no one had ever paused to try and understand. Mr. Anderson stood there unsure of what to do. All the leadership lessons, negotiation tactics, crisis management skills. None of it had prepared him to face a child who had just pointed out the one thing he had never dared to admit, that he had never truly knelt, not physically, not emotionally, to look at his daughter eye to eye without control, without pressure. He took a step forward, but Ellie turned away, buried her face, her back curled up as if bracing for another blow from the adult world. The therapist did not intervene. She understood this was no longer about physical therapy. This was an emotional earthquake, and sometimes you have to let it shake hard enough and crack wide enough before you can start rebuilding. Mr. Anderson stepped back out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time, a question echoed in his mind. Maybe from the start, what Ellie needed was not therapy, but someone brave enough to sit quietly beside her pain. After that tearful session, the therapist asked to speak to Mr. Anderson privately. She no longer used distant tones or academic language. She just sat down next to him like someone who had witnessed too many forms of misdiagnosed pain. "Your daughter does not need another therapy program," she began. "Ellie needs a reason to believe that those legs still belong to her." Mr. Anderson frowned. "I have done everything. I've taken her to every place. I've hired the best. And you've never asked Ellie whether she still feels like her body is her own. She cut in softly but directly, because she chose to cut it off, not physically, but consciously. That line stunned him. The therapist pulled out a folder. She flipped through MRI scans, EMG reports, reflex charts, then pointed to a small section. Muscle reflexes are still present. Nerve signals are not completely severed. Which means, biologically speaking, Ellie has a chance of walking again, or at least partially recovering function. Mr. Anderson looked up. You're saying she might walk again? Possibly, she nodded, but not through force, not through machines, only through her own courage to reach back into a fear she's buried for too long. She paused, then continued slowly. Ellie's body is not broken. It is being rejected by her own mind. She hates her legs. She hates the feeling of being pitied. She hates the look on her father's face when he enters the room. And she hates herself for not being able to save her mother in that accident. Mr. Anderson blinked. For the first time, he saw clearly what he had missed. All these months, Ellie was not just hurting from grief or paralysis. She felt like a burden, a mistake, a leftover piece the world no longer wanted. As long as she believes her legs were the beginning of everything going wrong, her brain will not allow them to heal. The brain protects itself by locking away the memories and reflexes tied to trauma. That's why she resists all touch, not just yours, but anyone's. He said nothing. His fingers clenched together as if holding on to a memory he had long let slip. The times Ellie pulled her legs away when the doctors came in. The times she refused to be carried to bed, the little flinches in her knees when he accidentally brushed against them. The therapist spoke again, more gently, but a light has come through. That boy Leo did not try to fix her. He did not try to encourage her. He did not use words. He simply touched her. And that touch did not awaken fear. It brought back the feeling of being real. She shouted, "I do not need Dad." But what she meant was, "I do not want to be fixed. I want to be understood." Mr. Anderson lowered his head. "So, what should I do?" The therapist smiled. She did not answer right away. She simply placed her hand on the folder, closed it, and said, "Sometimes the first step is not asking your child to stand up, but kneeling down first, not to apologize, not to restart, but just to say, I am still here, whether you walk again or not." That sentence echoed through Mr. Anderson's mind the entire drive home. He had once stood so tall on podiums in boardrooms, on stages where thousands of employees looked up to him, but he had never truly knelt in the way Ellie needed. That day, the sky held no rain, but when he stepped into the house, into her room, Anderson felt a dampness in the air, like a storm had just passed. After the conversation with the therapist, and especially after hearing Ellie scream through her tears, he could no longer sleep. That night, when the city fell silent and the lights of skyscrapers began to dim, he sat alone in his study, staring at the final words the doctor had said. Sometimes the first step is not asking your child to stand up, but kneeling down first. Until now, Anderson had never knelt, at least not in his own mind. In the business world he built, bowing down was a sign of weakness, a loss of control, a surrender of power. And now he had to relearn the most basic emotion a father should have: unconditional presence. One question spun in his mind. If I could not do that, then who did and how? The answer, of course, was only one: the beggar boy in the park, Leo. The one he had driven away without hesitation. The one he had forbidden his daughter to even mention. The one he had once seen as a threat just because he did not fit the clean, stable, logical mold Mr. Anderson had created. And now, Mr. Anderson, the man who had always held the final say, had to find a way to approach a wandering child who had left no trace behind. The next morning, he woke up early. For the first time in years, he did not go to the office, did not check his email, did not open his phone. He put on plain clothes, a slightly wrinkled shirt, khaki pants, canvas shoes, trying to look less like someone stepping out of a sedan worth over $100,000. He drove to the park where Ellie had met Leo. Sitting on a bench, he looked around. Everything seemed the same: children playing soccer, elderly people walking, a few homeless individuals quietly eating donated bread. But Leo was nowhere to be seen. He began to ask around: the street cleaner, the security guard, the snack vendor. Most of them shook their heads. "Which kid? There are tons like that around here," they said. Anderson gave a clear description. Thin, about 9 years old, dark skin, messy curly hair, sits still, does not ask for money. One guard scratched his head. "Oh, I think I remember a kid like that. Never talked, just sat and watched people, but I have not seen him lately. Do you know where he went?" "No idea. The kids around here move a lot. Some sleep under the overpass, some at the old train station. But that one, he was different. Never played with others, never begged. I once saw him pick up a discarded scarf and place it gently over an old woman sleeping on a bench." Anderson thanked him, then walked toward the old train station. The farther he went, the more he felt something shifting inside himself. A man who had once funded hospitals, sponsored schools, awarded scholarships, was now digging for clues about a child he once dismissed. But that very child had done what all his investments never could: made his daughter speak, draw, and cry with real emotion. At the train station, he asked again. This time, he was luckier. An old woman selling iced tea remembered, "Yes, yes. He sat here a few afternoons a few weeks ago, held a blank sheet of paper, just watched people without a word. One time I offered him a bun, he shook his head, but then took a piece of plastic I was about to throw away and used it to wipe dust off a bench. Is he still around here? Haven't seen him in a while. I heard some kids say he often went under the eastern overpass, the place other kids avoid because it's cold and damp." Anderson did not hesitate. He parked near an unfinished building where luxury car tires had never rolled. He stepped through muddy puddles, past rusted metal roofs, and for the first time in his life, breathed in the damp, musty air of life at the bottom. Not through reports, not through documentaries, but through his own lungs and heart. There, in a dim, shadowy corner, he saw a small figure curled up on a plastic sheet. Curly hair, frayed shirt, bare feet, eyes half closed. Next to him was a box filled with tiny sketches, drawn in pencil legs, a wheelchair, a hand. Anderson stood still for a moment. He did not know what to say, did not know how to start. He no longer carried the authority of a father, no longer assumed he was helping. He just wanted to understand who was the boy his daughter chose to open her heart to. He stepped slowly forward, stopped 3 paces away. "Your name is Leo, right?" The boy did not answer. He simply opened his eyes and looked up, eyes that showed no surprise, no fear, no coldness. Just a look, as if he had known all along that one day this man would return. Mr. Anderson asked a second time, "Your name is Leo, right?" The boy remained silent. Then he gave a small nod. It was a slow nod, not defensive, not afraid, and not at all like the gestures of a child used to begging. Anderson had come prepared for a father's conversation, with a long list of questions about Leo's intentions, his living situation, and why he had approached Ellie. But when Leo's eyes met his with a quiet, bare honesty, Anderson suddenly felt like a man lost in the very conversation he had come here to lead. He sat down a few meters away, just far enough not to intrude. He did not speak right away. He just watched, and he saw, really saw, what he had never taken the time to notice before. Leo had nothing but lacked nothing that would make someone stop and take notice. In front of Anderson sat a child with a straight-back, deep eyes and skinny hands gently smoothing the edge of a torn blanket. No shame, no avoidance, no effort to look older or smarter. He was simply present, as if he had always been there, whether anyone saw him or not. Anderson was about to speak, but just then, a homeless man staggered toward the darkened corner where they sat. He was shivering his worn coat, barely offering warmth each step, dragging under heavy breath. Leo did not flinch. He stood up quietly, pulled back a tarp, and spread part of it over a broken bench. Then he returned, picked up an old cloth not clean, but carefully dusted off, and gently laid it across the man's knees. No one asked, no one thanked him. Leo said nothing, just nodded and returned to his spot. Anderson sat in silence. Something very small had shifted inside his chest. The boy did not help in the way grown-ups do. No suggestions, no advice, no inflated sense of heroism. He simply did it as if it were as natural as breathing. Anderson suddenly remembered Ellie, how she would recoil when he tried to offer advice, when he pushed her to move, to endure, to be strong. But this boy, he simply appeared, placed a hand gently, and stepped back like someone who knew he did not need to do much, only to be there at the right moment. "You met Ellie at the park, didn't you?" Anderson finally spoke. Leo nodded. "Did you know, just your one touch made her speak again?" After 6 months, Leo looked up, not proud, not surprised. "I did not mean to do anything." "Then why did you touch her legs?" Leo stayed quiet. After a long pause, he replied softly, "Because I know how it feels when no one dares to touch you." Anderson went still. In his entire life, no one had ever said something so heavy from the mouth of a 9-year-old child. No evidence, no statistics, just truth. And it was real. He looked at Leo as if truly seeing him for the first time, not with his eyes, but with his heart. The armor of a father who had been wounded, who had tried too hard to be strong, began to crack. "She really cares about you," Anderson said slowly. "I was wrong not to see that." Leo said nothing, but his eyes were no longer distant. He gave a small nod, not the kind that says, "I forgive you," but the kind that says, "I understand." Anderson looked around, trash moss, rusted metal, cold wind slicing through. A lump rose in his throat. He had once thought this was a place to avoid. But now, here he sat as if asking for forgiveness, not just from Leo, but from the part of himself he had long tried to forget. "Do you want to see Ellie again?" he asked, voice hoarse. Leo looked down, then gave a slight shake of the head. "Why not? I do not know if I should." "Why not? Because you're Ellie's father," Leo said. No resentment, no blame, just honest. Anderson felt his chest tighten. For all these years, he had let the word father become a power, a role, a burden, forgetting that being a father was also about learning how to love a little more each day. He bowed his head truly for the first time. "If my daughter needs you to open her heart, then I have no right to stop that." In that moment, Leo said nothing, but he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, a pencil sketch still unfinished. It showed a grown-up's hand resting over a child's hand. No faces, no setting, just warmth. He handed it to Mr. Anderson, without a word. Anderson took it, his hands trembling. He looked at it for a long time. Maybe for the first time in his life he understood true healing comes from presence, unforced, unconditional, and quiet. Their conversation ended in silence and reflection. Anderson returned to his car and drove home. The next day, he did not take Ellie to her scheduled therapy session. He gave no long explanation to the doctor, just called to postpone. At breakfast, he poured Ellie's milk like always, but for the first time, he did not set it down. and walk away. He sat beside her. "Do you want to go out?" he asked. Ellie did not answer right away. She looked up, her eyes a little clearer than before, though still uncertain. "Where to the park? Just for a bit. Not for therapy. Just a walk." She did not nod. She did not refuse. But after a moment, she reached out, signaling for help with her coat. That was her way of saying yes. The morning park was quiet, a light breeze, leaves scattered beneath empty benches. Anderson pushed her wheelchair down shaded paths, pausing now and then at the sound of birds, or when she pointed toward the lake. When they reached a quiet bench behind the fountain, he stopped. "Ellie," he said gently. "Do you remember the boy from before?" Ellie turned slowly, her eyes no longer cautious but full of anticipation. "His name is Leo," Anderson said. "I saw him again. He still remembers you." Ellie did not reply, but her hand gripped the armrest, a small gesture easily missed, but to a father who was now relearning how to observe his child, it was louder than words. "Would you like to see him again?" he asked. A pause. Then Ellie nodded. Leo stepped out from behind a tree where he had been standing from the beginning. He did not rush, did not run, did not call out. He walked as if he knew exactly when he was supposed to appear. As Leo approached, Ellie did not turn away like she had with strangers before. She looked straight at him, eyes glossy, but unblinking. Leo stopped one step away from the wheelchair, knelt, no touch, no words, just eye level. "Hi, Ellie," Leo said softly. "Hi, Leo," Ellie replied. Two simple greetings, ordinary. But for a child who had not spoken in over half a year, it was a bridge stretched across a very long distance. Anderson did not interrupt. He stepped back, held still, like a quiet shadow. Just as the doctor once said, sometimes a father does not need to do anything. Sometimes he just needs to allow. Leo pulled a paper from his pocket. It was the unfinished sketch this time, with something new, a little girl in a wheelchair with flowers at her feet. Ellie took it, her hands trembling. She stared at the drawing for a long time, and then, for the first time in many months, she reached forward, not waiting for someone to touch her. Leo stepped closer without fear. He knelt on one knee, held out his hand, but this time did not place it on Ellie's leg. He placed it beside her, letting her decide. Ellie looked down at her legs, legs she had once hated, once believed to be the cause of all her pain. And for the first time, she placed her own hand on them. Before placing it on Leo's, Anderson held his breath. This was no longer about allowing others to touch her. It was about consent, control, acceptance. "My legs," Ellie whispered, "are still mine." "Right," Leo did not answer with words. He just nodded. Ellie looked toward her father, who stood quietly, tears filling his eyes. "See, Dad?" she asked. "Yes," Anderson replied, voice thick with emotion. "I do not hate them anymore. I know." A long silence fell over that small garden. There were no machines, no medical charts, no doctors. Just a child who had once lost her voice, now choosing to step back into life even without standing up. Leo did not stay long. He gave a soft goodbye, turned, and walked away. No drama, no hugs, no grand gestures. But this time, Ellie called out Leo. He stopped. "Thank you for not walking away." Leo turned back and smiled, a warm smile, thin as morning light. "He never left," Ellie whispered to herself. "I just wasn't ready to walk toward him." Mr. Anderson no longer needed any more analysis. The scene before him said it all. A child once closed off, now opening the door. A heart once controlled, now choosing freely. And a father who finally learned that the most important thing was not to pull his child toward himself, but to kneel down and walk beside her at her level. And that night, for the first time in months, Ellie slept through the entire night. No jolts. No crying out for her mother in her dreams. No waking up halfway. She simply held the drawing Leo had given her and drifted off her eyelids, closing peacefully, like a door that had finally shut after being left ajar for far too long. Anderson sat by her bed watching his little girl as if seeing a part of his own memory he had never gotten to live fully. Her small fingers, the way her hair fell across her forehead, her steady breathing, nothing different from any other child. Except for one thing, this little girl had just survived an earthquake inside her heart, without any lectures, manuals, or therapy protocols. Instead, Ellie had been reached by the one thing Anderson had underestimated the most: a street child with no home, no full name, no documents, no medical records. But that boy had done what Anderson, with all his power, money, and connections, could not make his daughter believe in herself again. Sitting there, Anderson had no more excuses, nothing more to reason out. No one left to blame. He was left with the bare truth he had not been enough to save his daughter. But Leo had been. The next morning, he put on the same old shirt he had worn the day he went to find Leo. He did not call the driver, did not follow a plan. He went alone, not as the powerful father, not as Ellie's legal guardian. This time he went simply as a man learning how to kneel again. Leo was no longer at the underpass. Anderson walked the neighborhood, checked in with the old woman who sold tea, then circled back to the rear side of the park. Finally, he saw Leo sitting beside a homeless woman, helping her patch up a torn bag. The boy looked up when he saw Anderson. No avoidance, no smile. Just that same quiet gaze as always. Anderson walked over. No small talk, no formalities. "Thank you for coming yesterday." Leo nodded. Ellie slept really well. First time in months. The boy did not respond, just gave a small bow as if receiving the gratitude without ceremony. Anderson took a deep breath, then said something he never imagined saying to a child: "I'd like to ask for your help." Leo frowned, not out of pride, but out of surprise. "You've done something I don't even know how to begin. She trusts you. And if you're willing, I'd like you to keep being there for Ellie. As a friend. Nothing big, just like yesterday." Leo was silent for a while, then asked, "Aren't you afraid letting your daughter be near someone like me?" The question caught Anderson in his throat, not because it was rude, but because it was the exact truth voiced at the exact right moment. He looked down, silent for a few seconds. "I was, but not anymore. I was wrong." Leo did not smile, but his gaze softened. "I won't do anything unless Ellie wants me to. I know. That's exactly why I trust you." This time his words were not coming from authority, but from someone who had finally seen the strength it took to remain whole in adversity. "Do you need anything?" Anderson asked. Leo shook his head. "Are you sure I just need Ellie to believe in me? That's enough." Anderson froze for a moment. For years, he had calculated everything: return on investment, trust, metrics, funding rounds, HR, insurances. But he had never realized that the most valuable thing in this world sometimes just requires belief. He extended his hand, not to lead Leo anywhere, but to shake his hand, as equals. Leo hesitated, then took it. His hand was small, dry, cold, but firm. The same way he had quietly held on to Ellie's heart, not with noise, not with claims, not with ownership, just by being there at the right time. And from that moment on, a quiet bridge was rebuilt. Not with contracts, not with negotiations, but with an invisible nod between two people both choosing to show up for a child who needed to live again. A few days later, Ellie returned to physical therapy. But something had clearly changed. That afternoon, Anderson brought her home. In her hands was the unfinished drawing, the one of two hands holding each other. No one said anything during the drive. But for the first time, the silence was not heavy. It felt like a pause in music, not an empty space, but a moment waiting for the melody to begin. The next morning, Ellie woke up earlier than usual. When Anderson brought her breakfast, she was already sitting up, her hair brushed, hugging an old teddy bear, the one she had not touched since the accident. He smiled. Ellie nodded back and whispered, "Dad, today I want to go to therapy." That sentence nearly froze Anderson in place, not out of shock, but because, for the first time, it came from Ellie herself. No pressure, no persuasion, no rewards offered. Just, "I want to." He did not ask why, did not call attention to the change. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder, nodded, a silent way of saying, "I'm ready to walk with you." The physical therapy center looked the same. White walls, the scent of rubbing alcohol, the steady sounds of wheelchair wheels, but Ellie entered with a different spirit. She did not look away when the therapist smiled at her. When asked to move to the training bed, she did not need two people to lift her, just one of her father's arms at her back, and the other hand she placed on the rail herself. That day, for the first time, Ellie let the therapist touch her knee without pulling away. The therapist, who had been with her for 6 months, looked at Anderson, her eyes misty. She said nothing, just signaled gently for him to stay still and watch. Ellie glanced at her dad, then looked toward the window where a small figure stood at a distance. Not clearly visible, but enough to let her know someone was out there, not stepping in, but not leaving either. When the therapist asked her to try flexing her calf muscle, Ellie closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and tightened. Just a small, slow movement, but for everyone in the room, it felt like the finish line of a marathon. The therapist pressed her lips together. "Good, really good. You did it, Ellie?" The girl opened her eyes, not smiling, but her lips moved. "I did it." Anderson stepped forward, about to reach out, but this time Ellie grabbed his hand first. "I want to keep going," she said. In the days that followed, the therapy plan was adjusted gentler with more emotional awareness. Ellie no longer recoiled from touch. She began to ask questions. What are we doing today? Sometimes even, how far have I come? When do you think I can walk? Leo was not there during therapy sessions, but every morning before Ellie left home, he would appear at the corner of the park, handing her a small piece of paper, a drawing, a quote, sometimes just a messy, smiley face. Ellie collected them all in her notebook. She called it her fuel collection. One day, when asked to stand using the support frame, Ellie trembled a little. The therapist asked, "Do you want to rest?" She shook her head. "No, I have Leo." The therapist chuckled. "What did he say to make you so strong?" Ellie paused, then answered. "He did not say anything. He just stood there, like Dad did the other day." Anderson heard that and fell silent. Some actions need no words, but they say more than any speech ever could. 3 weeks later, Ellie took her first 2 steps with the support frame. She did not scream. She did not cry. She just turned and looked through the glass where Leo stood. No waving, no cheering, just eyes shining bright like a small, warm fire. She told the therapist, "I want to walk, so that one day I can sit beside him, no wheelchair, no one pushing, just walking together." Anderson sat on the bench, phone in hand, not typing anything. He was just watching his daughter, not as a patient, not as a fragile child, but as a soul quietly growing back, step by step, through trust and choice. He did not know what the final outcome would be. Maybe Ellie would walk, maybe she would not. But the most important thing had already happened. She had chosen to live again on her own legs, though still shaky, and with a heart that had been reawakened. The therapy room felt brighter than ever, not because of the lights, but because Ellie had taken her first steps by her own strength. Anderson watched her, and deep within him a quiet thought echoed like a whisper from from far away. Sometimes the first real step does not begin with your legs. That afternoon, Anderson returned to the park. Leo was still there by the same old tree near the wooden bench, holding another scribbled sketch. He saw Anderson, nodded slightly, then turned away again, as if the visit was simply part of the day's natural rhythm. Anderson walked up direct, as always. "Do you have anywhere to go?" Leo paused, then softly shook his head. "Anywhere can be home," he said. Anderson smiled. "But I want you to have a place to truly call home." Leo looked at him, no suspicion, no emotion, just silent, as if waiting for the next words. "I am not saying this out of pity," Anderson said, voice firm. "I'm saying it because I know Ellie needs you. And to be honest, I need you too." Leo stayed quiet. The silence grew long enough that even the wind could be heard. Then he asked, "Will your daughter be okay with that?" Anderson shook his head gently. "She asked me 3 times this morning. Is Leo coming today?" Leo smiled, just a small one. Genuine. At last. "I've never lived in anyone's house," he said, though his eyes no longer avoided contact. "You can stay in the guest room, or the living room, or wherever you feel comfortable. You don't have to do anything. Just be there the way you've always been for my daughter." Leo looked at him, and for the first time, his eyes held something. Maybe surprise, maybe emotion, maybe fear that something too good might be getting too close. "I have no papers, no guardian. Aren't you afraid I'll cause trouble?" Anderson chuckled. "I had nothing either once, but someone gave me a chance. Now I'm just doing that again, this time with my heart instead of logic." Leo did not answer right away, but Anderson could tell this silence was different. It was not distance, it was careful consideration. "Do you need time?" Leo nodded. "All right, but if you're okay with it, let's start tonight. Ellie's cooking noodles. She said she wants to make his favorite dish herself. I am terrible in the kitchen. If you don't come, she'll be mad at me." This time, Leo laughed, a real laugh like a kid. "Then I'll come," he said softly. And that was the first time after so many touches, gazes, silences, and understandings that 2 people, one grown up and one not yet grown, finally sat down to a meal together. No walls, no roles, just being there together at the right time. The first dinner ended with quiet laughter and a silent glance between the 2 children. No one said much, but the way Ellie scooted her chair a little closer to Leo while watching television, or how Leo tilted his head to listen when she mumbled about the noodles, was enough for Anderson to understand there was something between them that needed no name. That night, after Ellie had gone to bed, Anderson stepped out to the porch with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. Leo was sitting in his usual spot, the place he had quietly chosen the very first time he entered the house. His eyes were turned toward the sky, staring at a lone star above. Anderson handed Leo the mug. He did not ask anything right away. He simply sat beside him, just like Leo had done with Ellie. After a while, Anderson spoke gently. "If you don't mind, I'd like to know more about you." Leo did not turn his head, but his voice was lower than usual. "I used to live with my mom, in a small rental room at the end of a worker's alley. Cracked cement floor, low ceiling, hot like an oven in summer, soaked through in winter. But that place, that was home to me." "Did your mother work at a garment factory?" Anderson guessed. Leo nodded. "She worked until the accident. Night shift. A steel frame fell. No one caught it in time." He paused. "After that, she was paralyzed on one side. Everything at home stopped. I was still a kid, but I understood no one was going to come help. There was no insurance, no support. I took care of the house, pushed her wheelchair, cooked, fetched water. Some days we had only rice porridge and warm towels." Anderson did not interrupt. he knew that memories like these, once brought to the surface, needed space to breathe. That winter was colder than usual. Wind pierced through the metal roof. One night, her breathing grew weak. I boiled water warmed her hands, wrapped her tight. But the next morning, she did not wake up. No sobbing, no tears. But Anderson understood this child had grown up on a winter night after a fall that no one caught in time. What happened after that? He asked softly. I went out on the street, slept at bus stations, sat in the park. At first I begged. Later, I just sat. You never looked for help. Help makes people tired. Everyone has a family. I didn't want anyone to feel burdened by me. One simple sentence and Anderson felt something catch in his chest. And Ellie. Why did you reach out and touch her that day? Leo looked him in the eye. Because I know what it feels like when no one dares to touch you. The words were not dramatic, not loud. But Anderson felt something collapse inside him. He, a father who had always tried to control everything, build every plan, had never once asked Ellie, what does it feel like when no one dares to come near you? You know something. Anderson exhaled. You didn't just help Ellie. You taught me how to sit still. Not lecture, not instruct, just sit. Leo lowered his head. The cocoa in his hands had grown cold, but between them that night, something warmed not because of the drink, but because someone had finally sat still long enough to listen. 1 month after that conversation on the porch, Anderson quietly began the paperwork. Not as a gesture of charity, but as a private, responsible decision, he officially filed to adopt Leo. The boy did not know right away. He continued living with the Andersons, waking up early, helping water the plants, peeling fruit for Ellie, playing board games with her reading books. Each evening, he would leave behind a small drawing, not words of comfort anymore, but sketches of things Ellie might one day do, walking step by step, standing at a chalkboard, carrying books to school. And then one day, Ellie stood up without the walker, on her own, with the legs her mind had once rejected. That morning, the whole house seemed to hold its breath. Anderson was making coffee when Ellie pushed the door open and stepped inside, no wheelchair. Slow, but steady. Leo followed behind, not holding her up, just walking like a quiet shadow. I'm ready, Ellie said. I want to go to school. Anderson could not speak. He just pulled out a chair, set down his coffee mug, and knelt to hug his daughter, not because he was afraid of losing her, but because he knew she had chosen to come back. Ellie returned to school after nearly 2 years. Her classroom welcomed her like a miracle. The other students gasped, then broke into applause. Her homeroom teacher wiped away tears when she saw the once silent girl by the window, now standing in the middle of the room, eyes bright, voice no longer timid. That same day, Anderson held Leo's hand as they walked through the school hallway. The boy wore a crisp white shirt and khaki pants, his first school uniform ever. Are you sure? Anderson asked. Leo nodded. I want to study. Ellie said I have to get better at reading so I can read faster than her. The papers had been signed just the day before. Leo legally adopted by Anderson. But more importantly, he had chosen to be a child who went to school not because he had to, but because someone was waiting for him. On his first day, Leo sat next to Ellie. They did not say much, just exchanged a look that said, everything we've been through so much and now we have each other to keep going. During recess, a classmate asked, "Who are you that Ellie likes you so much?" Leo smiled. I'm the one who sat next to her when she forgot she could stand up. And that was enough. The story of Ellie and Leo spread faster than Anderson expected. Not through newspapers, not through social media, but through the eyes of those who saw them on the school grounds, through whispers between teachers, parents, and those who once saw Leo sitting quietly beside a wheelchair in the park. Once during a parent meeting, the school principal approached Anderson and smiled. "You know, every third grader thinks Leo is the best friend anyone could have. Not because he's smart, but because he's not afraid when someone's sad." Anderson smiled, but inside something rose, a feeling, not of pride, but a deep, quiet gratitude. That he had nearly lost his daughter, if not for a child once invisible to the world who had shown up at exactly the right time. From that day forward, Anderson made a decision. Children like Leo should not have to wait for random kindness to find them. He redirected part of his personal charity fund not toward large organizations anymore, but toward a new program, Companion Friends, a place where homeless, orphaned, or abandoned children could be paired not with caretakers, but with real companions. Not long after, a small support center opened, not far from the park where Leo once slept. Anderson named it The Gentle Touch, in memory of the moment that started it all, the silent, asking nothing touch of a boy who had awakened a sleeping soul. Leo and Ellie joined him at the opening ceremony. No speeches, no stage. They simply sat in their uniforms watching new children receive gifts, hug stuffed animals, and laugh out loud. After the event, a little boy walked up to Leo and asked, "Are you rich?" Leo laughed. "No. But my adoptive dad used to be rich in logic. Now he's rich in heart too." Anderson stood a few steps away and overheard. He turned away, not wanting anyone to see the redness in his eyes. Since then, once a month, Anderson drove himself, no driver, no assistant, alongside Ellie and Leo, visiting donation spots, free literacy classes, and temporary shelters. The two kids did not say much. They just showed up the same way Leo once showed up for Ellie. One day, while cooking noodles with the children at a shelter, a curly-haired girl tugged on Ellie's sleeve. "Why can you walk now?" Ellie bent down and smiled. "Because someone once told me I didn't need to be afraid of my own legs anymore." Leo glanced at Ellie and gave a small nod, and Anderson, standing beside them, realized something inside him had completely changed. He was no longer the man who controlled everything. He was someone walking beside his child on a road he had never planned, but one that mattered deeply. And so little by little, color began to return. Not brightly, but just enough for a life once drawn in grayscale to be painted again. By three hands, a man who once lost his daughter. A boy who once lost his mother. And a girl who once lost herself. That afternoon, as the three of them left the last charity stop of the month, Ellie suddenly turned and asked Dad, "Do you remember the first moment I met?" Leo Anderson smiled. Not because of the question, but because he realized something. The very things that once made him angry, like that unexpected touch years ago, had now become miracles in his life. "I do not remember the exact date," Ellie continued. "I just remember that was the moment I felt like a person, not a patient." Leo said nothing. He simply smiled, his eyes soft, as if he too had forgotten the exact day, because the miracle was never about time. It was about presence. Time had passed just like that, from a touch in a quiet park that once seemed meaningless to Ellie's first steps, to the moment Leo stood in a white shirt in the schoolyard. And now, three people who had once been hurt, once been lost, were walking together, helping other children find their way back to the light. Anderson, the man who once thought he had to be strong to stay in control, had now learned how to sit down. Leo, the boy who had once been turned away, had become a companion to hundreds of children. And Ellie, the girl who once feared being touched, had now stood up and walked forward, not only with her legs, but with her heart. This story did not begin with a miracle. It began with a glance, a touch, and a heart brave enough to stay with someone's pain without running away. If you are still here watching this, perhaps you too have once gone quiet in front of something that moved you. And if there was ever a moment when you missed a glance, a hand reaching out that you did not see, let this video remind you. Sometimes the smallest things are the ones that change a life forever. Click subscribe if you want to see more real stories, stories without superheroes, without magic spells, but full of kindness, shared at the right time. Leave a comment because maybe, just maybe, the words you write could become someone's very first touch in silence. You do not need to do something grand. Just be there at the right time. Just like Leo once was. Just like Ellie learned to stand. And maybe just like you right now.